I have a very fundamental desire here, and that's to have you join me in changing the world of work. And particularly the world of work, not just for yourself, but for the next generation. So that's my intent here today, and that's what we'll spend the next 30 minutes on. Surrounding this project that I am going to launch as a pilot project this summer, and preparing college students to enter the workforce with a new understanding and a new level of motivation. And so that's essentially what I'll get to in describing what I'm going to do today. But to do that, I also want to give a little bit of a backstory for this project to make sense. And that backstory actually relates to the Vocari network. And the backstory isn't always explicit in this setting. I know we talk, this is an incubator, as I think Bill said earlier. This is really a network of like-minded people incubating businesses, nonprofits, projects, initiatives that are trying to make the world a better place. And we work off some fundamental assumptions here that aren't always explicit, at least in our lunch program. So some of this may be new for you if you're a guest. Consider this as a new understanding of how to look through the lens of life. And it'll make sense as we talk about why this space originated, and then I'm going to map it to this project. So with that, I want to start with a story that really affects the trajectory of my life and why I would even want to invest in a project that helps college students go to the workforce with a new understanding. That was in 1990. So in 1990, I was living in Dallas seminary. I was living in Dallas, attending actually seminary. I'm not a vocational minister, but I was going to seminary at the time. And my mentor had spent 35 years in the country of Haiti. Essentially, he was the Indiana Jones of Haiti, if you will, or the Francis Assisi for those that are Catholic and may know the great things that he's done. And he was planning a trip to spend about 12 days in Haiti in the month of May, and he was taking 5 pastors, and he decided to take me out again. I was not a pastor, I was in seminary. And we went on this project to see the work that he had been developing over those last 35 years for us to get exposed to it, identified with it, and then possibly participate. So we're down in Haiti, covered about 50% of the country in those 12 days, and I'm not kidding, we easily covered 1,200 miles. I know it's not a big country, but it is possible with unique infrastructure that you don't have here in America. During that time, there was one unique experience that happened during a breakfast in the morning that really marked my experience there. And it was a breakfast with a guy who had been on there about 7 years. His name's Jim. Walt, my mentor, had taken me to breakfast, just the two of us with him. The other guys, the pastors, were sleeping in. I'm not, no editorial comment, they were just sleeping in at the time. But we went and we spent breakfast with this guy. He'd been there 7 years. He had started a factory. And that factory was making surgical equipment, originally from Philadelphia. And he had relocated there with his family to build this factory so it could create surgical goods for essentially the Western Hemisphere. American corporations were probably his biggest client, but that's where he had spent time. He had a particular idea. He was a devout Christian, and so there were some motivations in doing it there versus elsewhere. But the key experience that, if you will, awakened something in my imagination was the fact that he had transformed 450 people's lives over that 7-year period. He had employed 450 people, 2/3 of which were women. And at that time, as we spent time in that conversation, he also described a number of things. One was he essentially tripled their standard of living during that experience as he built the company and had brought employment. He'd often also employed other family members, and so began to affect family members, and then, of course, communities. They get involved in providing spiritual input on the campus of the place where he ran the factory through, again, his particular persuasion, providing Bible studies, but also other workplace training outside of the people that had the jobs there. And so, again, as you can sense, there was a moment of realization for me that helped me understand, wow, this is what it means to make a difference in the world by using your skills, your talents, and your intent in a way that has outcomes that aren't just simply economic, but deeply social and spiritual, and contributed to really the human flourishing of that community and that little slice of Haiti. I haven't kept up with him, but that again defined the trajectory of me realizing as I was preparing to be a vocational minister, it really shifted that ideology and that desire of moving in that kind of sphere to then what I would call a marketplace agent of reconciliation. And so that was the first moment where that journey began to change for me, what it meant to actually do something of significance, and realizing that it was rooted inside this idea of going to work every day. Right, the things that we're doing, the reason that we're sitting in this room, the places that we're going to go to later after this time, the place that we just came from, that place is a place that was intended to be part of the original design of who we are, and a place where we discover good, where we discover the power of the human quality of making a difference in the world. Right. So some of you have been in the Vocari community for a long time. That's not news, right? The news here today, though, for what I'm trying to make a case for is why is that significant, and what can you do with it beyond the things that you're already doing, or how can you actually infuse the things that you're doing now that make a difference for that. So let me note a couple of ideas before I get into this project that are tied into really what I call the presuppositions for why I would think that's significant. One of those presuppositions is this whole idea that God has created us for work. Again, a phrase that many of you are familiar with. And I want to refer to an ancient text that probably half the group will know, an ancient text that you're familiar with, that help change or help set the groundwork for why this project is significant in preparing college students to go to the workplace. So I'm going to read this just word for word, even though you have this, and I want to note a couple of things that are significant here, just so we understand it. So this happens to be the first book written in the Old Testament, so in this ancient text that really binds the great religions in the world, really has an assumption of how we were designed and therefore maybe how we should live. So God said this, he said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Goes on, so God created them in his image, male and female, and then it jumps to the next passage there, and it says, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over," all of these creatures up here, "and ourselves." And then later in the next chapter it says, he was talking about the garden, the first setting, the first workplace setting in which God placed the human race was a garden, and he said to work it and to take care of it. So if you will, here you have an origin of why we even have the natural capacity and drive to go do something in the world, i.e. the world of work. And so this is tied into what I would call a number of key ideas, again, just for ease and simplicity, to say why, what is it that's in that passage? Again, familiar things. We bear the divine imprint. So why do we have ambition? Why are we motivated to succeed? Why are we committed to creating the perfect service and what our particular skill and talent is? What is wrapped around those natural motivations that are often invisible that we don't explore or reflect on? I think it's tied into what it means to be human, because God created us with that capacity, right? Because it's his capacity. It's his capacity, and he's translated that and made that deposit in us. Something unique that doesn't exist in any other creature in the world, but is tied in who we are. And it's the image of a God that actually created us. And that now we're experiencing thousands and thousands of years later, living that image in us. It may be broken, conversation for another time. It does need repair, restoration. Yes, all of that's true. But the power of us experiencing even here on earth in the condition in which we live on earth, it's still powerful to understand that was given by design. It's something that you cannot escape. It's in you. It's undeniable. It's proven every day. People wake up and go to work and build cities and communities and whatever they do to fill the earth. Right? That image or that mandate is naturally happening, whether people recognize the connection of where it came from and God that created them. So here's the other. So because that work is by design, work is good, work creates community, and then really the key parts of this project is that we need to rediscover the idea that work is a gift. Work is a gift, actually, not a curse, right? But it's actually a gift given to us. And in that, it also has an intrinsic calling. Not an instrumental calling, not that I have to do something in order to get something. No, I actually have work as something that's designed in me by a God who created me, and that's something that I offer to the world. It's intrinsic, regardless of what that work is and the diversity of how it gets worked out throughout the world and what we may do individually and collectively as different communities. So this is the backdrop of what I would say needs to be restored. Here's the dilemma.